Welcome to Accounting in the Wild, where we'll discuss various subjects in the tax and accounting world, also featuring tales from the field and interviews on various tax and accounting subjects. All this and much, much more on Accounting in the Wild. And now, here's your host, Jason Dinesen.
Welcome to another episode of Accounting in the Wild, brought to you by MyCPE1. To watch or listen to this podcast and receive continuing education credits for doing so, head over to my-cpe.com and continue your professional learning journey. Our guest today is Nick Mullen with Entoo Security. That's Entoo Security. And we're talking today about all things data security for tax pros and accountants. And really, pretty much everything that we talk about applies to any business. And as an added bonus, if you sign up for services through Entoo Security, you'll get 50% off of your onboarding fees if you mention Accounting in the Wild. So go to their website. It's Entoo Security, Entoo Security.com, and sign up for their service and tell them you heard about them on Accounting in the Wild. They'll give you 50% off of your onboarding fees. And now, on to the show. Well, welcome to another episode of Accounting in the Wild. We have Nick Mullen, the Chief Advisor with Entoo Security, with us to talk about all things relating to data security. And so, Nick, on podcasts, we generally like to just jump right into the subject. But before we do that, let's just do your quick elevator pitch, your 20 seconds, 30 seconds of what exactly is it that you do?
Sure. Yeah. So Entoo Security is we're a full service cybersecurity firm. Our primary customer base is small accounting firms, tax firms, bookkeeping practices, and other small businesses, typically that, anywhere from a solopreneur up to, 10 to 15 employees is kind of our bread and butter.
Well, great. So you're here to talk to us all about data security. One of the things that I wanted to start with was something that I saw on LinkedIn, because we're connected with each other, but it was kind of a joke post about how easy it seems with data security. Just don't click on the link. But this stuff is a lot more than just use common sense, isn't it?
It is. These cyber criminals, they have strategies, they have budgets. They're organized. This is the new organized crime. And so they have tactics that they know work, and they employ those at scale, and when I say at scale, they're sending, thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of emails a day. And it only takes one. Oftentimes, if you run a business, and you probably know this as well as anybody, you're probably going to get half a dozen of these emails a day, and it only takes one to slip through, and all of a sudden you've clicked on a link or you've opened an attachment, and that can be all it takes.
Now, what are some, we still joke about like the Nigerian prince schemes, dear brethren, you've inherited $15 million from some African prince or whatever, but I guess maybe they're still doing that in some cases, but these scammers are pretty sophisticated these days. What are some things that the modern day scammer is doing?
So it's funny you mentioned the Nigerian prince thing. That I actually got a phishing email that was very similar to that tried and true old scam within the last, I'd say, 30, 45 days. It was from a person who said he was the CFO of a bank in Switzerland, holding on to an account with about $8.5 million in it from a long lost relative of mine that died in the California wildfires earlier this year. And so, they're even pulling stuff from recent news articles. The craziest part about this story is the CFO that they were impersonating really exists. Is a real person. He is a CFO for this bank. Now, why would the CFO of a Swiss bank be reaching out to me directly? probably there's not a lot of logic to that. But also the person that he said had died in the California wildfires in that email was a real person and is actually a very distant relative of mine who is fortunately still alive. Um, so I mean, these scams they're getting better all the time, and a lot of it is because they can use AI today to research, and get different types of information that they can use as a hook to try and get you to engage, and ultimately that's what they're going for. But even when you look past those old Nigerian prince or lottery scams and things like that, now they're a lot more sophisticated where they're sending email attachments that when you open it up, it has malware inside of it. Something else that we're seeing a lot that's probably going to be very applicable to your client base or to your listeners. Um, a lot of scammers today are taking advantage of free trials with QuickBooks Online and DocuSign, where they can go in and they can sign up for a free trial with one of those platforms for 7 days or 14 days, and then they can send out agreements and send out emails directly from QuickBooks Online or Intuit or DocuSign, and it's a real email from that real sender. But when you click on the link inside of it, it contains malware or it redirects you to some place where it's going to use like some sort of credential harvesting or something like that. So they're using real websites and real business, for a real business purpose that you may be expecting to deliver some of these payloads today. It's really sophisticated. To be honest, it's pretty clever. That's that's one of the things that I'll say about criminals is they never miss a trick. I mean, they come up like they don't have a rule book that they have to play by. They can come up with all sorts of clever tactics and techniques to try and scam you and socially engineer you, and I am always surprised at the ingenuity that they come up with, in a bad way, but
Right.
they're very, very clever. And every time you put some sort of tool or technique in place to try and block one of these attacks, they've got two or three more waiting in the wings.
Well, I would just wanted to say, as part of what you just talked about, I got yesterday a DocuSign from Adobe from some person I'd never heard of, and I
Mm-hmm.
deleted it immediately. I didn't click on it, but you think about how people are overwhelmed these days with email. I mean, you get hundreds, if not literally thousands of emails, and if you're a tax practitioner or just a business owner, you might have hundreds, if not thousands of people you deal with. And so it's like, oh, someone needs me to sign something. I guess I'll do that, or I'll open the link or whatever. I mean, it's it's really dangerous, isn't it?
It is, and a lot of small firm owners, their business model, they may have dispersed workforces, or they may have offshore resources. They may have a virtual assistant that works for them who doesn't know all their clients by name, and may only be monitoring your info at mailbox, or your support at mailbox, and they will open those emails because they just don't know any better. Whether you train them or not, they don't know all your clients' names. They don't know all the conversations you have and all the business that you're doing or trying to do, and they're just doing what they think is right. And so, even with training, that's not foolproof. And then when you think about volume, and if you're in a time crunch, imagine it's April 10th, and you're trying to meet some deadlines, and you've got a lot of emails coming into your inbox. You don't have time, and honestly, you probably don't have the mental capacity at that point to really do thorough analysis of every email as it comes in. So our recommendation is technology. Let technology do the hard work for you, which is typically what we recommend to our clients.
Now, I remember when I was practicing, I don't prepare tax returns anymore, but I did up until this past tax season. One of my clients worked in IT, and he was talking to me one time about the Swiss cheese approach to data security, which I'm sure you've heard of. And I don't really know what I'm talking about, but I'll try to describe it here and then I'll let you talk about it. But basically, you set up systems of defense, and the bad actors probably will get through some of them, but they're looking more for easy marks. And so maybe they'll get tired after they've gone through the first or second or third wave of your defense.
100%. It's defense in depth. Everything in the cybersecurity space, we've learned from someone else. And typically it's the financial sector or, even the military. Like these tactics they've been around for hundreds or thousands of years. You want to keep somebody, out of your castle, you build a moat, you put a gate, you got high walls, like it's defense in depth. And then,
Yep.
have higher walls and higher walls and higher walls. And eventually the idea is that they'll give up and they'll go away. The same thing happens in cybersecurity. You put multiple different layers of defense in, knowing that this tool will protect against 50%. This tool will protect against another 50%, and this tool will protect against another 50%. And when you combine them together, you hope that, you hope that you've got, close to 100% coverage at that point. And that Venn diagram starts to kind of form up, and you're like, all right, well, I've got pretty good defense at this point. Someone's really going to have to invest a lot of time and energy to penetrate my defenses and to have a successful cyber attack against me. Typically, a lot of small business owners will rely on one layer of defense, which is not, it's not what I would recommend. And typically they've set up that one layer of defense themselves, which is also, sometimes problematic.
Well, and that one layer of defense a lot of times is antivirus, but sometimes with some of the things, or is it a lot of the things that today's scammers are doing, the antivirus might not fully protect you.
Antivirus, that was a really good tool about 20 years ago. And the way the antivirus works, the simplest way that I can explain is it's called a signature based tool. And so it'll see that you've downloaded some sort of file, and it'll look for the naming convention of that file. And there are known naming conventions that it'll know are viruses or malware or spyware or something. And at that point, it'll block you from downloading it. Or sometimes they can inspect the file a little bit more and see some of the source code inside of it and say, we know that this code means that this is a virus, so we're going to block it. That's all well and good, except for the cyber criminals know that's the way that the antivirus works. And so they don't give them those common naming conventions, and they use more clever code to try and hide the intention of what the virus is actually trying to do. And so a lot of times what you want to have is more of a behavior-based agent that is doing some of this heavy lifting for you. And so instead of just looking for the names, it's looking at, what does this file actually do? What's the behavior that it's taking? And then when it sees it's starting to take some of that malicious behavior on your system, it'll go ahead and quarantine it or quarantine your entire computer, take it off the network, and stop things in their tracks. But that's a pretty advanced tool. You're probably, well, first off, most of the time, if you're like a solopreneur, you're probably not going to be able to buy and install a single version of this on your computer, because these are require enterprise licenses, or you have to buy it through some sort of intermediary. And even if you are able to purchase it, then setting it up is going to be very difficult, or knowing what to do with it when something does happen. That's ultimately, you think on the tax side of things, it's all well and good to file your own taxes, but what do you do when you get an audit? Well, now you need to call for help. So it's all well and good to install the software on your machine yourself, but then what happens when something goes wrong and you don't have anybody to call? It's become fairly worthless.
Well, and if you click on something you shouldn't, or you download a file that you shouldn't, I mean, the bad actor can actually take over your machine, right? And then your antivirus and all your other defenses don't do you much good at that point.
None whatsoever. And so really you need to, again, have that defense in depth approach. And a lot of times those malicious payloads, or those, the malware is delivered in email. And so when we were talking earlier about the different ways that you can kind of protect yourself in your email environment, there are specific tools out there for email security. That was actually I think that was the meme that you may have seen here a couple of days ago. It was around email security. And basically what it'll do is, if there's an attachment in the email, that tool will scan the attachment before it ever even lands in your inbox. Or if there's a link in the email, it will click the link for you and see where it goes before it ever lands in your inbox. And so then if it detects that, hey, this is a credential harvesting site, or this is malware, or basically anything that, some sort of social engineering, it'll quarantine that email and keep it from ever even hitting your inbox. And so then you won't be able to click on it. You won't be able to execute this payload because you never even saw it. Instead, it got quarantined. It got moved to, a quarantine inbox, and a notification came to somebody like me to go in and take a look at it and see, hey, is this truly malicious, or is this just a poorly written email from a client?
Right. Now, one of the things that scared me was that article that I shared with you earlier this week. It was another LinkedIn thing. I've always thought that multi-factor authentication was pretty brilliant, and I suppose it is. You've got your phone, and you're either on an app, or you have to approve something or whatever on your phone. But that's not always foolproof either, is it? How are hackers, I guess this may be a technical question, but in layman's terms, how are the bad actors getting around multi-factor authentication these days?
So there are a few different ways to do this. One of the best ways is social engineering, and they'll basically they will spam like your phone with those SMS texts, and then have someone else reaching out to you and saying, hey, I'm from tech support, or I'm from this company, and I need to verify this, MFA pin that you received. And they just keep pushing it to you over and over and over, or they'll keep pushing, the button to authenticate for you to approve. Because sometimes with the authenticator app, all you have to do is click approve. They'll just keep clicking that until you get tired of it and click approve. And that attrition technique works quite a bit. There are a couple other ways that they can do it. The other one is they can sniff your web traffic right out of thin air. And this sounds crazy, but it's not. With Wi-Fi, you've got ultimately it's a lot of ones and zeros that are bouncing through the air on these Wi-Fi signals. And so if you're using some sort of unencrypted um, if you've got an unencrypted connection, so you're not using a VPN or anything like that, someone with the right tools and technology can literally sniff those ones and zeros out of the air. So they're sometimes they're able to see what those multi-factor authentication codes were that way. Probably the most effective way, though, outside of the social engineering piece, is they're already going to have malware installed on your machine. And so you got infected maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they're waiting for you to go into your online banking, or they're waiting for you to sign into this system where all your clients' financial records are. And then they're able to basically become a man in the middle. And so once they have that malware installed on your machine, they're able to intercept the token that shows that, hey, you are authenticated with multi-factor authentication, and then they're able to log in as you.
Wow.
It's I mean, it's pretty advanced, and for somebody to do that, they have to have made a concerted effort to compromise you. Like you're not just a happenstance target at that point, you're an intentional target. But the thing to keep in mind is a lot of these cyber criminals, they're operating out of developing countries. And so if they can get $5,000 out of you, or steal $5,000 out of your bank account, that may be what they would make working a real job in their country in 6 months. And
Right.
so, waiting a couple weeks for the right opportunity is nothing for them. Like that's a great investment of their time.
Right. Now, you mentioned social engineering. I mean, I know one of the things that's been said for years is like, don't use your date of birth as your PIN, or your anniversary, or, your wife's maiden name, or your kids' names, or whatever. But I mean, these hackers, some of them anyway, do research, don't they? I mean, you mentioned that scam email or whatever that you got that had a relative's name in it, and a real person at a bank. I mean, they do some research. Some of these people do anyway, and that whatever you have out there, they might try using it against you.
100%. And there's even cyber criminals now that are taking, I hope I don't give anybody any ideas here, but they would take a video like this of you and I, and they'll be able to create deep fake videos of you or I using this video as the source material. And the more video and the more audio you have of you out there in the wild, the easier it is for them to be able to create convincing deep fake videos. This actually happened at Ferrari, the auto manufacturer, last year. So someone called a high level executive at Ferrari from an unknown number, impersonating the CEO of Ferrari. Now, this executive knew the CEO of Ferrari personally, and he said that the person on the other end of the phone, he, with 99% confidence, he thought it was the CEO of Ferrari, all the way down to the region specific Italian accent. He said, I know this guy, and it was him. But he asked him to execute this financial transaction. Of course, it was a confidential financial transaction for millions of dollars, and I need you to wire this money to this account. And the alarm bells started going off. He knew this executive, and they'd had a conversation a couple months prior about a book. And the CEO of Ferrari had recommended a book to him. So he asked a something you know question. He said, "Hey, can you remind me what the name of that book was that you recommended to me a couple months back?" And of course, the cyber criminal didn't know that and hangs up the phone. But that's how easy it can be, particularly if you're a public figure. In fact, there was just something I believe I saw here within the last few days about a deep fake about Marco Rubio, where he's a public figure. There's a lot of media out there for him, and it's not difficult to create deep fakes. You see that about political candidates all the time. There are a lot of videos out there of Trump singing songs and and everybody else that aren't real, but they're pretty easy to create with AI.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I mean, as we talk about this, and your average tax pro or accounting firm, I mean, how do you even start? Where would Nick Mullen, the cybersecurity expert, recommend that people start on getting their house in order with all of this?
I think it depends on the size of their firm and the way their business model, kind of what their business model looks like. If it's just you, then your blast radius is a lot smaller, because you really only need to protect yourself, and you need to protect your identity, and you need to protect your workstation. If you have an actual physical location with multiple people working in that location, then you need to put in some different protection and defense in depth on that physical location as well. Or if you are working like a lot of modern businesses do, and particularly a lot of startups where they're kind of growing fast and nimbly, they may have a dispersed workforce all over the United States or even all over the world, and that changes the game dramatically. But for me, if I was, say, in the accounting profession and I was just starting out, the first thing I would want to do is understand, do I have the knowledge to do this on my own? Which is probably the same question that a lot of accounting folks are asking, like tax clients. Do you know enough about the tax code to be filing all your taxes yourself? If it's just you and you're just filing a 1040, then maybe you do. If you own a business and multiple rental properties, and your situation's a little bit more complicated, it's probably a good opportunity for you to phone a friend.
Hmm.
If your business is a little bit more complicated and you don't know how to do it all yourself, it's probably time to make the investment and help. Now it can be a little bit of a struggle, because there are a lot of companies out there that they're not sized to support a solopreneur or a small business. We're in a fortunate situation where we are, but that's where I would start. Understand what's your level of technological sophistication yourself, and if you're not comfortable, basically, if you're not comfortable handling a cyber incident on your own, like in the event that it happens, you should probably look for help.
Well, and if you think about anybody who works in the financial field, which tax pros are considered by the Federal Trade Commission to be in the financial field, you get hacked, you get whatever happens to you, client data gets stolen. I mean, that's a go out of business type of thing. If you're trying to do it yourself and cobble things together, you're just hoping it doesn't happen. I mean, this is devastating.
65% of businesses close within 6 months after a cyber attack. And you look statistically at that, and it's unreal. Um, yeah, and then when you look at like the ransomware scenario as well, over 80% of businesses that get held ransom once get held ransom again. And so even if you are able to withstand the attack and you pay the ransom, well, now they know that you're a mark, and they know that your cybersecurity is probably not very good, and they know that you're willing to pay the ransom. And so it is extremely common. Like I said, over 80% get held ransom again. And so, it just kind of adds insult to injury there a little bit.
Well, now a couple of other things that I wanted to talk about that were on the list. You have all this different software that you use, whether you're an accountant or you're a small business owner, even just people on their own personal computers. You have all this stuff. And let's, I guess, back up and focus it on a business, I guess. You have your software that you use in business. Maybe you're even using ChatGPT, or you have AI extensions on different things. How important is it, and how do you do it to evaluate all those different things that you're using as far as within a cybersecurity lens?
So I would say one of the most important aspects of, choosing the right tool or technology for your business is choose things that work together. Because once you start cobbling together solutions and integrations on your own, you're opening yourself up to vulnerability, because chances are the way that you've cobbled together your solution is probably not the most secure way to do it. So if you can find tools that natively integrate with one another, and someone else that is a little more security minded, or they're a security professional, has kind of built those integrations, then leverage the work that they already did. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Let the smart people do what they do best. It's kind of, the same way on the accounting side. Let the smart people do what they do, and you just write the check. Now, beyond that, how do you evaluate what's secure versus what's not? That's a little bit more difficult. I wish that I had a silver bullet answer on this, but everybody's going to tell you they're secure. Ultimately, if you ask any company out there, hey, what's your security look like? They're going to say, oh, we're great. We're super secure. I had a conversation with a company that I was actually vetting for a client about a month ago. And I'm not going to name who they were. But they said, yeah, we've got multi-factor authentication in place. And I said, well, what's your multi-factor authentication to log in? And they said, well, it's a text. I said, so when do they have to use the multi-factor authentication? They said, is anytime they were going to change information in this place or this place. But they didn't have to use multi-factor authentication every time they logged in. And I said, well, could I change the phone number on my account that is used for multi-factor authentication without having used multi-factor authentication? And the guy sat there and looked at me and goes, yeah. Now, this company would tell you that they are 100% secure. They have a SOC 2 report, and which is a security report. But this simple, logical fallacy of the multi-factor is the phone number, but you can change the phone number without multi-factor. Those types of things are super common. So typically, wow, if it's a platform that I'm not familiar with and I haven't worked with personally, I'm going to have a phone call like that for, on behalf of one of my clients to just basically do a sniff test and ask some of these basic questions to see whether they know what they're talking about and whether they know what they're doing or whether they don't. Which is, again, one of the values of working with a partner, because you may not know all those questions to ask yourself.
And along those lines, offshoring, that's a big thing in the accounting industry nowadays. I mean, from a security standpoint, I guess, what should people be thinking about with offshoring?
So with offshoring, typically, you're doing that because you're trying to save money. Some people say it's because they can't find good help in the United States. I've got my own personal opinions on that. I think there's a lot of folks looking for for work in the United States that are very qualified. And I don't personally offshore anything for that reason, because I don't have a hard time finding qualified candidates in the U.S. However, if for some reason you do, or just from your business model necessitates that you offshore some of this work, typically they're hiring someone in Central America or the Philippines or Sri Lanka or India to do a lot of this accounting work for them. And they're letting folks work on their own machines on, unencrypted connections. And it's terrifying because they're accessing your client's financial information from a machine that you have no control over. You have no control or knowledge of what they're doing with that data once they get access to it. It's very, very scary. And if you haven't thought about that on the front end, when you're kind of designing your business model and the way that you're going to operate, you're opening yourself up to a lot of risk, because ultimately you hire the wrong person, who is either, a bad actor themselves, or they can be bribed. This happens quite a bit. We just saw this here recently with a major technology provider that, or actually it was Coinbase, the crypto exchange. They had someone that got bribed to give some credentials to allow somebody to go in and compromise Coinbase. They paid him $5,000. Like, that's not. It's not like they had some 7-figure bribe to go out there and be a malicious insider. It's $5,000. So it's not like it costs a lot of money when you're offshoring some of this work. So typically what we recommend is you need to have span of control over the machine that they're working over or that they're working on. You want to have span of control over their identity, and you want to have span of control over their internet connection. If you don't want to send them a laptop, which typically people don't, because that's a big expense, and there is a decent likelihood that you'll never get that laptop back. At that point, you need to stand up some sort of virtual machine environment, and they can work from their computer. But when they're on that computer, they need to go into a virtual desktop to work for you. And you can control the virtual desktop environment, and you can lock down the virtual desktop environment so they can't copy and paste any data out. You can secure the connection on the virtual desktop environment. In fact, you can even set up, like, whether you're using Google Workspace or whether you're using Microsoft, you can set it up where they can't even log into their Microsoft or Google Workspace account unless they're on the virtual desktop. And so those are some of the measures that you can take. And it's not incredibly difficult, at least for my company. It's not, because this is what we do. If you're trying to set it up on your own, it would be pretty tough. And even finding a provider that would set it up for you might be a little bit difficult, because typically they're not going straight to the end client. Those providers work with companies like mine to set up this infrastructure. But that's my recommendation: virtual desktops, and secure that environment, and have span of control over as much as you possibly can.
I guess, Nick, the bottom line on all of this stuff is you got to think about it, don't you?
Yes, that's it. And it's easy to see how things kind of spiral out of control, because you start and it's just and you're working from the computer that you may have had for a couple of years that originally was a personal computer, and now it's become a business computer. I say all this from personal experience, because I started my own consulting practice 3.5 years ago, and it was just me working from a laptop that I already owned. And before long, you've set up your domain, you've got your website, you've got your email account, and that protecting yourself isn't overly difficult. Your blast radius is small, but then you start adding employees and contractors, and your business becomes more complicated. And oftentimes you're not really establishing those strong technology foundations. You're just adding on to the existing infrastructure that you already have. And you're trying to be quick and nimble and do this, do everything fast. You ask your contractor, hey, do you have a computer? You do? Great. All right, we're good to go. I'll get your email address spun up and we're working tomorrow. And that works until it doesn't.
Right.
And in fact, if you're in the accounting space and you're working in the United States, the FTC safeguards rule says that you can't do that. And the FTC safeguards rule isn't just it's not some arbitrary rule that some that the FTC just made up. It's part of GLBA. So I mean, it's a legitimate legislation that has a lot of authority and a lot of backing, and six-figure fines if you don't follow it. The crazy part is most people don't even know about it.
Oh yeah, I mean, uh, we haven't even talked about it here yet. Let's talk about that as kind of our closing thing here. Is the safeguards rule and the data security plan. I mean, I know when I put my data security plan together, it seemed daunting at first, but there's IRS publications. There's even a fairly new template that they've come out with just in the last year or so that you can use to fill it out. But I guess the safeguards rule and the data security plan, Nick, it gets back to really what we've talked about and what I just asked you about of stop and think about it and
100%.
write those things down, type them out, get it out there in some way, right?
Yep. The IRS published it's a WISP template here a couple of years ago, a written information security plan. It's one of the better templates that I've seen. The IRS did a really bang up job when they put this together. It's complicated. You know, when you're reading through it, like if you don't work in this space all day long and you're trying to figure out what it's really trying to get at, it can be tough. So it's very common that clients will come to us and ask us to kind of walk through that while they're trying to fill it out or put it together. But I mean, ultimately, we typically steer people towards the IRS template because it is put together so well and it covers all your bases. But yeah, I mean, if you're reading through that template and you're reading through the questions that it's asking and you don't even know what some of the questions are asking, like you don't even know what it means, then at that point, it's probably time to phone a friend. But between the FTC safeguards rule and the IRS data security requirements, it basically spells out that you have to have a security program. You have to be thinking about this, and you have to have the appropriate safeguards for the size and complexity of your business in place. And I think that might actually be a quote from the legislation. So, which, you know, if you've got multiple employees that are all over the globe, then at that point, believe it or not, you've got a pretty complex business model. And so you need a little bit more complex safeguards in place to protect the data, you know, both to keep your business operational, but also to protect the financial information of your clients. You know, because ultimately, if you get compromised and you're not there when your clients need you, then now you're putting an undue hardship on them as well. You know, and the IRS doesn't want that. In fact, I had a meeting with someone from the IRS back in January. We were kind of talking about this, and they said, you know, ultimately, we want people to be able to file their taxes, and we want people to be able to pay their taxes. So it's in our best interest to make sure that our tax preparers are operating securely and that they've got resiliency in their business, which is why we set out these requirements, because we want taxes to get paid. You know, that's one of the foundations of our country. So, you know, ultimately they are setting out good, pretty, at least in my opinion, pretty common sense requirements that, you know, if you implement everything the way that it says that you should, you're going to have pretty good protections in place for almost any business.
Well, you know, it's I don't like to say common sense. In fact, we talked about that at the very beginning, but that it's not just common sense, but protecting yourself and your business has always been something that you've had to do even before all of this technology. I remember when I started my career long ago, we had some computers, but everything was pretty much on paper. And it was always, lock things up in the filing cabinet so that the cleaning crew can't look at it, if it's just laying out on your desk. Or, businesses have always been vulnerable to someone like taking a brick and smashing out the window and coming in and stealing files or something. I mean, this is just kind of the 21st century version of things, really, is of protecting yourself.
It is. And today, in the way that we are operating kind of in this global economy, your window can be accessed from anywhere in the world. It used to be like they had to be standing at your front door to break in your building. Now you don't have a building. You might be like me where I'm working out of my home. But that front door exists all over the world. And so you have to put different tools in place and have different techniques. The scariest thing for me when I hear or when I'm talking to a client typically it's not when I'm talking to a client, it's when I'm talking to someone that's not a client yet, is they say, I'm too small. They're not going to come after me. Which on one hand, I understand the logic behind that. But think about the way things operate in the rest of the world. Who gets robbed more, banks or gas stations? Like, if the bank in your town got knocked off, if somebody came in and robbed the bank, that's front page news in the newspaper.
Yep.
If somebody goes in and robs the gas station, that's back page news in the newspaper, because it happens all the time. Now, who has more money, the bank or the gas station? For sure, it's the bank. But you also know that when you go and rob the bank, they've got a lot of defense in place. They maybe have armed security. They've got, alarm systems. The police are going to be there right away. So from a risk versus reward standpoint, the risk is very high, even if the reward is also high. The risk is very low with a gas station. And the same thing goes for a small business. Again, we're talking about cyber criminals that are typically operating out of developing countries. So if they can get 50 grand from you, that just made their year. That may have supported them for the next 2 or 3 years.
Exactly. Several years. Yeah. Well, Nick, if people want more information about what you do, or maybe even want your help, what's the best way for them to do that?
Best way to contact us is info@entoosecurity.com. So that's ENTOO security.com. Or you can visit us at www.entoosecurity.com. And also, if anyone mentions accounting in the wild, we will give 50% off our onboarding fees.
All right. Well, go to entoosecurity.com, get your discount. Well, Nick, I think that we'll be talking to you again. I'm sure that we have more stuff we could talk about. Is there anything else? I know this is a very broad question. Is there anything else in your mind that we should mention here before we go? Or do you think maybe we've covered everything?
One of the parting tips that I usually give people, take your time, use common sense. And if it seems too good to be true, then it probably is. Social engineering is still the number one way that people get compromised. Social engineering is involved in over 90% of data breaches. And most of the time, it's easily preventable if you use common sense. Again, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If you just had a random person send you a DocuSign that said they just wanted to sign up and become a new client, and you've never heard from them before, probably too good to be true. Although I wish that happened. Jason, if later on today I get an email message that comes through and somebody just signed up, then that would make my day if it's true.
But probably not a random DocuSign, though.
Probably not. My MSA is floating around there a little bit, but it's not quite that public yet.
All right. Well, Nick Mullen, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you again down the road. And our thanks to Nick Mullen with Entoo Security for being our guest on Accounting in the Wild. Remember, you can go to Entoo Security's website, entoosecurity.com. And when you sign up for their services, tell them you listened to this podcast, and they'll give you a 50% discount on your onboarding fees. Accounting in the Wild was brought to you today and always by MyCPE1. Head over to their website at my-cpe.com. Thanks for joining us, and join us again next time on Accounting in the Wild.
Thanks for listening, and join us next time for another edition of Accounting in the Wild with Jason Dinesen.